Thanks. Okay, so maybe we can just go ahead and start. So I wanted to start by asking, what do you understand by literature review? And,
Well, I understand two things.
Mm-hmm.
One is that it's supposed to be a description or a exploration of what the scholarly literature says about a given topic. And further, I believe it's ideal when your lit review makes it clear that there's a hole in that literature.
Okay. And so finding that hole in the literature is part of the goal.
I hope so.
Okay. Okay, any other?
I don't know if this is really true, but I think I've heard all along that it is supposed to be exhaustive.
Okay.
And I say, may or may not actually be true, but this whole thing of you need to read until you don't see anything new. It's just part of the terrifying piece of it.
So I've been really over there, but
I'm glad your eyebrows are going up.
yeah, because that's not. That's not really because it's not really possible. There's this book called what is that? Salsa Dancing in the Social Sciences. Research in a period of infoglut or something like that. And because there's just like so much information, that's just not going to be possible.
So the difficulty with that is like where do you find the boundary of what you're reading and writing about?
Okay. That's related to my next question actually. What do you find challenging about doing literature reviews? I've separated it, but they probably go together. What do you understand by literature review and why is it challenging? So, any other?
Well, for me, it's challenging to do justice to all this research that has gone before. It's challenging to comprehend it and summarize it. I hope this is the hardest part of the whole dissertation because it's very, very rigorous to really apprehend what these scholars are saying.
Sometimes you feel so overwhelmed that you don't know which one should be the best one that you need to use to support your idea.
Which ones to include you mean? And which ones to exclude? Okay. Any others?
Well, for me, at first I was having a real struggle finding empirical evidence. My advisor said, you can use lots of theoretical evidence, even if you don't have any empirical, that's okay. So I ended up finding empirical evidence, but for me it's a balance between empirical and theoretical.
Okay. So, those are some really finding the hole in the literature. That's one of the goals of the. But sometimes it's not. I think it's a way. It's more like a metaphor of finding a hole in the literature. But sometimes that metaphor is not really useful because you're looking. Oh, is that gap going to come out and stand in front of my face after reading the literature? So that can be a little bit of a. It may be a metaphor that works for some people, but for some other people it doesn't work. And maybe you can look at other metaphors about what to do in the when we approach the literature review. And it's supposed to be exhaustive. I would say no, not really, because that can be that is what makes it so overwhelming. And so you have to do that boundary. You have to draw boundaries, and that's the time when so you have to decide what are your inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria, and the way to do that is to start when you're looking at the literature is to start by developing questions. What's your guiding question when you're doing a literature review? So maybe we'll look at some of those strategies about how to approach this mammoth, of the literature. So, is it visible clearly for everybody? Mm-hmm. Okay, so many times we have to do literature reviews because it's part of an exam or something like that, and so we feel like we need to demonstrate our knowledge on a topic, we have to show our expertise, we've read the scholarly literature, or sometimes we're doing it because we want information, we want to know how will this inform our maybe a study or something like that. But one thing that I found useful about, just like that metaphor, instead of approaching it as I have to find a hole in the literature, you can look at it more in terms of entering the conversation. Have you heard of this kind of a phrase before? So it's about, okay, who are the scholars, what are the debates, what are the debates that have happened previously, what has already been said, and this is important because you don't want to reinvent the wheel when it has already been said, and you don't want to say the same thing all over again. And also to decide especially when it's about in creating a study, it's about asking, okay, all of this has already been said, what contribution can I make, what hasn't been said, so that's another way to find that hole or gap in the literature. So what hasn't been said, and it's also about deciding where to set camp, because there are debates going on, and sometimes it's not as easy as yes and no. It's the debates are a lot more nuanced, and so you're like, okay, where do I set camp over here? And from that place, deciding how do I, what can I say that people haven't said before. So that's one way to look at it. Yeah.
Just the whole purpose of a lit review is to talk about what other people have said. So basically you're saying to set it up, okay, I see what you're saying. Never mind. Got
Okay.
it.
Yeah. But it's also to situate yourself
Yeah.
within what other people are saying, right? And so then also the selection of the different bodies of literature is about making creative combinations. Like people may not have combined particular, so that part about what hasn't been said is about maybe the previous people haven't combined two bodies of literature, and so you can do that creativity comes from combining, bodies of literature that haven't been talking to each other, you can say. There have been some scholars who are totally in two different groups, they've not been talking to each other, and maybe you are making them come in conversation with each other. So that's the way you can find the gap or the hole. Okay, so what's the process like? And so it is an overwhelming process, there's no doubt about it, and there's nothing to avoid. You can't really not think about it as an overwhelming process, but there is an element of getting lost in it. But I guess at all times need to remember that it's an iterative process, and so this is one way to think of it. Like you start off with a question, but you know that you start off with some research questions and objectives, you define, so you make keywords, right? You have keywords when you do searches, and it's a good idea to save those keywords and to save the combinations of keywords, and to see, because that brings out some literature, and you would read that. Once you read that, you realize, you evaluate it, you record it, you write down what are the main assumptions about this or arguments within these papers, and then at the end of that process your keywords get refined. and you have new questions, probably you might find that, I've heard some people say, I came in asking a question and I found out that that study has already been done. Now what do I do? So that's probably going to happen to many of us, and it's definitely happened to me. But once you read a lot more, hopefully it generates questions that are more nuanced than what you started out with. And so the process should generate more questions as well. And so then that's an iterative process, and at some point you feel that you reach a point where you feel that, I think this is an area that I can make a contribution, and it's that time that you start. And it's a process that you have to keep writing. It's not like you write at the end of the literature review. It's an iterative process. So you write, you say, okay, these are the bodies of literature, maybe that I found useful. This is the question that I'm going to ask. This is my research question. But as you read more and more, you find that that your questions have changed, and the kinds of scholars you're engaging with have also changed. So that's something that you need to remember. And another way another way of representing that process is like a funnel. You start off with a broad question, you jump from different areas, and then your questions change throughout that process till the questions become a lot more narrow and specific and nuanced. Okay, so that's another way to look at the process of doing a literature review. And this is there, this Prezi is there on the, the blog that it was there in your email.
Oh,
Okay, so you can, so you don't have to take more notes than necessary. Yeah, so I have, on that blog I created this form. It's called, if you've got your computers or maybe once you go back home, it's called OLPD Spring Workshops 2014.blogspot.com, and I've created this form for which you need to log into your UFM ID, and I'm thinking that it's just an attempt that I'm thinking that because people are doing searches, they are familiar with doing literature reviews, and they've learned so many tips and strategies along the way. And so I thought it might be a good idea for us to just put in what we already know for students who. So if you the first question that I want you all to think about is, what strategies and resources do you recommend in doing searches for literature reviews? And if you already have some ideas, maybe which is your favorite search engine, why do you like that search engine more than others? What strategies do you use to narrow down your searches, to find the articles that you want? So some of those strategies, I think that it would be a good idea if you could, it would be nice for the department, if you can put in all of, fill up that form, and at the end, if you just hit the submit button, you can see the previous responses. So I just filled in a cup. So I've written that I like Google Scholar because so let me tell you why I like Google Scholar. Because I like to, let me think. Just some word I'm working with right now. And so I like it because I can select from, say, 2010, I just want stuff from 2010. Another way to use literature reviews, to Google Scholar is, let's suppose I like this particular scholar, and I want to see what he's done. And I'm looking for a specific article. Have you ever tried doing this ANT, the Boolean operators? Have you ever tried using this Boolean operator? So if you use A and D in capital, you know, you can, and if you want specific phrases to come together, you put them in inverted commas. Have you tried that before?
Yeah, I have done that, like, so that the word that you search will not be separated to like different sentence. Because it happened like when you search for international education in Cambodia, and then you put it like just word, and then it's gonna be international education in Cambodia. So
Yeah.
they're not the same that you want to find.
Yeah, you want all of them
Yeah.
in the same article, yeah. So if you put a capital A and D, then you will get all of those different terms in the same article. You know, it's not just looking for one or the other. So, and if you put it in inverted commas too, you'll get the word, you'll get it in the same phrase, like Warwick, Anderson will come together. Or post-colonial techno-science. So you see here you get post-colonial techno-science together rather than post-colonial separately and techno-science separately. So these are some strategies that help you narrow down your, the kind of articles that you get. And those, so if you learn some of those strategies, I just recommend you to fill up that form on the blog. But here, where will you go to? Where can you go to right now to get those kind of ideas? Is the library. The library has recorded video tutorials which gives you tips on, like 45 minutes tutorials about how to do searches through using Google Scholar or MNCAT Plus, and we can go through our entire program not knowing that those tutorials exist. So you can just go and check out that library website and see those tutorials, and because that can really help you to narrow down your searches. What are the search strategies? One search strategy is to read literature review articles. There are articles on a particular topic that have already done some work for you. They may be a little dated, maybe that literature review was done maybe 2 or 3 years ago, or maybe 5 years ago, but it's still a way to get started, to see who are the scholars who have already been participating in that conversation. Also to look at bibliographies. Sometimes there are published bibliographies on particular topics, and so that's a way to start recognizing some familiar scholars who are working in the field. So for example, when I was doing a literature review on community service learning in higher education, and I found this article by Dan Buten, which was written in 2005, and he had this nicely organized literature review, organized in terms of you have functionalist perspectives in community service learning, you have critical perspectives. So he cited scholars in each of those approaches, and I just looked at those scholars and saw what is their work after 2005. So even though he was talking about only till 2005, I could look at those scholars and see what's their latest work after that article. And of course those articles then led me to other scholars. So that's one way to start, by looking at existing literature review articles on a topic. Here's a place called literaturereview.hq.com, and it's a great website. You should just check it out because it's got really good, it's got a lot of videos and podcasts, and so he has some suggestions about how to make it less overwhelming.
Hi, I'm Ben from literaturereview.hq.com, and today I'm going to make a short video about something that many people have asked me about, and that is, what is the literature review question? What do you need it for? How do you find it? Now, the reason this has been asked a lot is because a lot of people try and write their literature review because they they obviously have a topic about which they could write about. And so they take the topic and they go and they write their review. Seems straightforward enough, but especially in modern days with the access that we have to the literature, this topic is actually a monster when you try and consider what it actually involves and what you need to do to write it. You'll be taking information from over here, you'll be taking information from over here, over here, over here, over here, and you'll be trying to join it together and link it into some kind of coherent review. And it's not possible because of the scale of this topic. It's normally just too big. What you should be writing with a literature review is something much, much smaller, much more specific. So you may write a literature review about this small section here. And that is where the question comes in. So you may be given a literature review topic, which is something like cancer drugs. Now, clearly you can't write a literature review about cancer drugs. The topic is meaningless. I mean, cancer drugs mean so many different things to so many different areas of science. To biology it means one thing, to chemistry it means another, in the social sciences it means another. So you've got to really define it. Even if you're just talking about biology, you have to define it, you have to cut it right down. So instead of saying the topic is, instead of writing a literature about cancer drugs, you would write about something like the effect of cancer drug XX or the effect of cancer drug type XX on treating cancer YY, for example. And so your question will be, how do you effectively treat cancer Y with drug class X? And that will be obvious in the title. Whatever your research question is, whatever your literature review question is very obvious from the title of your literature review. At the same time, you wouldn't write a literature review about French politics. It just is too large. You could ultimately, eventually write something about French politics, but it would be this kind of area here that we're talking about. It would be massive, it would be huge. Instead, what you need to do, you need to find an area of French politics that is this. So you'd say maybe, I want to write about the socialist policies of the government in France between year X and year Y. Or I want to write about the policies that govern the economic growth of France between year X and year Y. So you see what I mean? You're going from a topic which is very broad and you're making it very, very narrow. So this helps us to actually define what our literature review is going to be. So there's three main components that I see them to the research, to the literature review question, that help you decide what it actually is. So as we've just talked about there, the literature review question is specific. So you make your question much, much more specific. We've just kind of gone through a little bit about that, give us some examples. Your literature review question is also interesting. Now, a lot of people don't really understand why you would make a literature review question interesting or why it's important that it's interesting, but it's very important. If you want to publish a literature review, people have to find it interesting or it's not going to get published in a journal. People have to want to read it. At the same time, if you are doing a literature review for a class, the person who's marking it is going to give you a high mark if they find what you've written interesting, if you've put if you've written it in an interesting way, if you've narrowed it down to an area that is genuinely interesting. So and then also, you've got to find it interesting, otherwise you're not going to be able to write a very good literature review. So it's got to reflect the interests of your audience. and it's also got to reflect your own interests. Because if you find it interesting, you're going to put more time, you're going to put more energy into it. Now, this last point actually is probably one of the things that people don't think about at all. In the fact that your literature review is going to be novel, it's going to be new, it's going to present new information to people, and a lot of times people just don't understand how, don't understand why. You're writing a literature about something that's already been done. So almost by definition, what you're doing is anything but novel. You write about something that someone has done already, someone's written about already. But that's not true. You are presenting information in a novel way because of your interpretation. The way you interpret the information that you have is novel, and that's the novelty value of your literature review. And so when you decide your question, you need to decide how are you going to present something new, something that hasn't been done before. And the reason it's new is because you have all the information at your fingertips. When people presented their original research, they didn't have all the current information that you have now, and they certainly didn't have your mind's eye and your way of interpreting, your way of looking at the data, and they probably didn't have your slant on it either. When you're looking for a question, they probably didn't have your exact question. So you're going to actually come up with something completely new that has never really been considered before, that has never been looked at in this exact way.
Sorry. But I mean the point that he was trying to make was about that how can you I mean you don't start with your literature review thinking that you do started thinking that this you're trying to bring in something new, right? And you may find during that process that it's already been done, but you may find different, but there's always this interpretation that new kind of interpretation that you can bring it. Maybe it could be about a different context, it could be about particular experiences that haven't been considered, and it's because you have entered this field thinking that there's something more to be done, or there is some aspect over there which is I think intuitively or instinctively you feel that you can bring in something new, and what's that new interpretive lens that you can bring to the existing literature. And so how would you frame that question, that interesting question, as you're trying to look into the literature? And so I want you all to just spend maybe like about a minute to think about what that interesting question would be. Maybe you've already done this before and I'm just saying stuff that you've already done anyway. But just to again, as more of an, if you haven't had time to think about it, just take a minute to think about what question can you look into with the literature.
Question in general about topic you're interested in.
About a topic, yeah. How can you narrow down that huge topic by framing a question? I'm interested in looking at, so if you say I'm just interested in immigration policy, that's a huge topic. Mm-hmm. But if you say I'm interested in understanding how, what are the experiences of one particular group of immigrants, and how does that compare with other groups? So then you're narrowing it down.
Does it have to be a question? Or can it be a statement, you know, so. Or is it the same thing?
Give me an example.
So, for example, what I wrote down was nuances of masculinity between Mexican American, between heterosexual Mexican American and gay Mexican American college men. That's a question.
It's quite narrow, but it is a question, but you could, maybe it's like, what does the literature have to say about it? So I guess implicitly it is a question. Yeah, the idea is, to narrow down. And how, for example, now that you have stated that sentence, when you look at the literature, do you think there are different groups in which different kinds of groups that you'll have to go to for that literature?
In terms of authors?
Yeah, I mean different, or maybe areas. Like, can you say that sentence again?
Nuances of masculinity.
What is the first word?
Nuances.
Nuances, okay,
Mhm.
of masculinity.
Mhm. Which is the general topic, and then I try to narrow in on it.
Well, one way it's a question is to say, what are the nuances?
What are
Yeah, or how has
But
the
is that
literature
assuming?
approached it?
Right? It's like my advisor's always like, well, you're assuming a lot.
That there are nuances?
Mhm.
Yes, and you can go ahead and assume that.
Yeah, I think it's fine to assume that there are nuances. So I guess what I'm saying is that you, from the question, you're looking at maybe transnational male youth, right? Transnational male youth as one particular body of literature. Another would be masculinity studies. So you have these different key search words and search phrases, and those are pointing to you, pointing that that's a different body of literature. You know? So I guess by narrowing it down, it also helps, and by thinking of those from the question, if you look at search words and combinations of search words, from that you can also gauge the kind of literatures that you'll have to go towards. So you're combining literatures, different literatures while you're doing that. Any questions?
Well, at the end of my introduction in my lit review, I have a draft of the lit review. I say the following questions directed this review of literature
Yeah.
about the experience of recent graduates as they make the transition from graduate study to work. And then I list three, actually, I list four, but my advisor said, try to stick to three. So I have three questions, and that's okay?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Those are like you said, it is more about what are the questions that guided your study, and so it's not going to be like super exhaustive.
Yeah.
But it is more about structuring your.
You know what's really interesting is these questions came out of the lit review. You know, so like I read and took notes for months. So these questions did not direct, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but that relates to that iterative process that I was
Yes.
talking about. You would have started with some question.
I did, and they were much more general.
They were much more general, and as you keep reading more and more, they become more and more specific.
I have a question just backing up a second. Is JSTOR included in the MNCAT?
Yeah, it is.
It is.
I was just saying, if you like
Yeah.
that particular,
Right.
format, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I find academic search Premier, I don't find that so useful. I personally don't like it as much as I like JSTOR, so that's why I
Yeah.
put it. But now I've migrated almost completely to Google Scholar.
Yeah. Google Scholar.
Oh, I love Google Scholar.
So let's, so the next, so those were about search strategies. And now as you're kind of found so many articles already, question is how are you going to organize all of those articles? And so at one level it's about citation management. Do any of you try these? EndNote, Zotero, RepWorks? No?
I tried and I didn't use them.
I don't like them. Anybody else?
I like Mendeley.
You like Mendeley
Yeah.
as organizing for
Yeah.
PDFs, right?
Mhm.
Again, all of these, they are there on the UFM library. Tutorials, there are tutorials on how to use EndNote, how to use RepWorks, Mendeley. I personally like to use, and this is going to be repetitive for you because you're doing this in class. We did this in another class, and I like to use Evernote or generally note-taking apps. Yeah. Oh, that's what you're using. Yeah.
What is it called?
Evernote.
Oh, Evernote.
It's a way to tag your articles, and you can organize them in multiple ways. And I like to use file folders. So I think it's because file folders are just more flexible in many ways. And I like Google Scholars, the site. They have this button where you say cite, and then you get the APA citation. So I don't really depend that much on the citation managers. I did try, but somehow I just found this to be more.
Yeah, because RefWorks always has mistakes in it.
Mm-hmm.
Always. It's very
I
frustrating.
also find some mistake in Google Scholar
You
and
do?
IPA, but it makes you feel easier to actually look at it and then just change something rather than just type the entire thing by your.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some mistake over there. You need to know the basic rule and then you
Yeah.
need but it's easier.
Easier.
It's
Yeah.
easy.
It's easier. Yeah, why I don't like EndNote is, but I know many people swear by EndNote, so it's something that whether it works for you or not. Why I don't like it is because it downloads as a file and then you have to save it into EndNote, and that's too much of a process. It's
That's a problem for me. Hmm.
So that's about those citation managers and productivity apps, and which you can look for. The UFM library site has many suggestions for that. Another thing, like I said, is bookmarking, search combinations. So if you use Google Chrome, for example, if you do a particular search on Google Scholar, and you select an article, you bookmark that article under a folder which has those search combinations. So that way you're keeping a track of the different search combinations you're using, because you might forget that you had done that kind of a search combination earlier, so which turned out to be very productive for you. So that's a good way of keeping track of what kind of searches you did. How about organizing the content? Is one way to do it is annotated bibliographies. Have you heard of that term? Annotated bibliographies? So an annotated bibliography is, okay, let me show you. Okay, this is an annotated bibliography. You have the citation and you have a brief description of it. So this is more like in terms of paragraphs where you're pulling out the main arguments, you're trying to summarize it. So that's because that's important, because that helps you pull out what are the important points that are relevant to your search or to your interest. You're not interested in describing the entire thing that person did, only to the extent that it informs your own interests or research study. And so that you include over there, and it includes the methods and your evaluation of that article, what you agree with, what you disagree with, why, something like that. And here I'm going to give you a template that I'm using from Dr. Shirazi's, and Connie, I think you already have this. So, but it's from the one that basically it's another way to organize your literature if you don't want an annotated bibliography and you'd like it more in the form of a table. Oh, didn't you get one? Sorry.
I keep passing mine somewhere.
Did everybody get one? So on one side of it is a template for documenting the literature, and you can make your own kind of columns, but that's another way to synthesize what you've learned from the different articles and put it down there. If you like it to be more fluid, then annotated bibliographies are another way to go about it. If you feel like this is difficult to fit stuff into columns and rows, then you can do an
Just one thing, like, in order to make annotated bibliography work for us, it's good to start writing when we're reading the paper and then summarize the paper that we are reading.
Summarize at the end of reading it, maybe.
So it's kind of like capture the most important argument in each paper and then have us to come up, like, frame our research question or discussion.
How is it in, so the questions that when you're doing an annotated bibliography would be, how does it inform your own study? What, basically make connections with your own study, make connections with other articles who are talking about the same thing. How are they, like compare, it's like a dialogue, right? Because I said that it's like entering a conversation. So it's about how are they responding, which scholars are they responding to, how are they responding to that, how are you responding to this conversation, and how is it important to the problem that you're exploring. So those are the kind of things that you would like to note, summarize in an annotated bibliography. Okay. And any questions about organization? So some conceptual strategies are concept mapping. Has anybody asked you to do a concept map of a literature before? Okay, so concept map is what?
Probably.
So concept map is basically to map out the literature. So one thing that you have to do when you're doing a literature review is to group scholars in together. These scholars are saying more or less the same thing. They're debating about a particular thing, but you can still put them together. And these scholars, you can put them together. So the literature is not going. People are not going to say that they are. You can organize them in different ways. There's no one way to group them. But your task would be to sort of map these scholars, And how are you mapping them on what are the conceptual ways in which you're mapping them? So just try to do that, and some people do that in different ways. One is through, the Venn diagram, 3 circles and finding an intersection in the middle. That's one way. But that kind of forces you to stick to just 3. And there is this book called by Kristen Luker, Salsa Dancing in Social Sciences. She suggests, she calls it the bedraggled daisy as a way to concept map. And so that's basically something like this. Let me just, these are the different topics. And her, I think somewhere, I don't know which is the intersection point. This seems to be a little too, lacking structure maybe. So, but basically those search terms and those search combinations that you were using, if you can group them in the form of a bedraggled daisy and look for that intersection, where that intersection is where your study is, or where is the gap, So people talk about the gap that way, so that intersection between the multiple petals of a daisy is that gap in the literature where your study will fit. So this is another example. These are all very artistic ones. You know, so this is where your study would be. It's in somewhere in the intersection of modernity, poetry and literature, Middle East history, power, knowledge, memory, orientalism. But these are all your search terms, and you probably are doing combinations of modernity and poetry and literature, modernity and Middle East history. So that's a way to make your search, organize the different search terms that you're using, and each of them standing for a strand or a strand of a literature, body of literature. And the intersection in that is where your study will come. And so if you can just spend like maybe 10 minutes trying to create a daisy of your own, it doesn't have to be as artistic as the previous one, it could be something like this. You can try creating that daisy. Let me know if you have any questions. Is that clear? Sheet somewhere here?
It's right here.
Thanks. Oh, did you get the grades?
Maybe I could have some stems.
Mine is now. Flower.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm making it into a flower. Yeah.
Okay, if you've, has everybody done something? Or do you need more time? Can we
That's
just
pretty.
Yes. It's in the middle.
talk with the partner next to you, person next to you, and just describe your concept maps?
So, mentioned in the early days of being completely narrowed down. And volunteerism. Looking at the surrounding the facts and the local population, and then people that are volunteering. And so we English speaking, and the difference between so anyway, some things I broke it down to. Also, the other thing, I want to look at this part of the frame. All these days, as an initial source, that was these scholarly sources. Do it before we get in, but there's a lot of volunteers blogs that take me so one is blogs in social media, and breaking that
So one of the things that Central
blog, culture of the country where volunteering, but the aspect, and then sure local, language, English versus whatever.
I was thinking,
Local language with ways of accessibility of US activity, a lot of these are overlapping as well. But look at customs and languages, and those differences and then the general problems, the difficulties between volunteers and the society. The difference between volunteers and difficulties, especially for things that are offensive, that long-term negative impact part of what our environmentally or socially.
These are Christian theories of
Also,
government.
And a term I heard a lot when I was volunteering was the idea of just passing through. So yeah, mine's a little sketch, but here's what's up.
So what was that?
With college success being at the very bottom.
Yeah, these things are important to know more, but like.
So I'm trying to look at all of the different factors that impact. But for this purpose, first thing I wrote down was cost. First generation status, low income, which actually should have been socioeconomic. Role of the family, generational conflict. What I'm looking at specifically is the differences between heterosexual and gay relationships. So that's where I put that's where I put masculinity, and then specifically border masculinity. So I'm interested in how what's expectations are conceptualized masculinity and how
Yeah, I like that too. Have you thought about going this way and starting with your ending and working on
yeah, I mean, I think all of those things are, yeah, I mean, yeah.
Assumption that you have no responsibilities outside.
So conflict that
The
reading about this topic.
kind of the only priority. And kind of tying
I would look at
working
Right.
family
first
values
semester.
My
and
professor
the literature
and client
that
curious.
sort of
This is something we can.
kind of turn it
You know, just
in higher education. So it was just unique. workplace.
I would even say gender
in
expectation.
that,
Not necessarily
there's
moral
sort
conflict.
of
Yeah, okay.
faculty culture of not having a defined clock. The same thing
Oh, I
for
took
a higher level administrators.
Preparation.
You should be available any day at any time.
And the other one is
Utilizing,
What is the difference
and kind of
between
looking
semantics
at
and
feminist critiques of
Actually,
that
it's not really a flower, it's more like a
Yeah,
tomato. But yeah, I mean, and the difference, I think all, anyway, yeah, I think this makes it seem like these are separated when they're really, no, I guess they're all sort of the same. Anyway, whatever. This is what I'm looking at, that's what I'm looking at. Right,
It's a
But
little.
actually, that's a really good input.
Yeah.
So then
So it's
also,
good actually.
That's what it should.
I wonder if this sort
I like
of
John's heroes and
There's nothing
branches.
else.
I wonder if this sort of,
and trying to.
because here at least everything keeps together, right? Whereas here.
Very interesting. Well, and most people are responding.
Yeah, that's a common. I mean, what I like to do here in those really masters is think of it more like a tree, like a branch.
Again, I think
Because you get more maintain and then off of that thing you get more details.
that's
And always sort of a bit snowflake or the flower.
This is my last
Right.
one.
Really a lot of work, but
Yeah.
a ton of stuff.
Some volunteer tourism. Hot topic, yes, hot topic.
It's
What are we
like
doing?
it's kind of, you have
But
a
I want to say that
also organizing through the ranks.
it's not really know is it
But I.
is it good for local classes and lunch or but
So you did your, you for the
Yeah.
top.
Yeah, but it's, I still have to edit.
Mutually beneficial.
But I start with
I'd like to do it in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
that's an opportunity to literature. Then for literature review, it's one page, you can see what there's literature. Right?
I don't think that's going to pass.
I just want to interrupt all of your conversation, and hopefully you can talk after, because I'll be giving a little time for you to talk amongst each other later as well. You can continue the conversation later. So what did you, how did you find this activity? Do you feel like you're finding that what we're talking about, the gap, or are you being able to understand the gap in the literature in a different way now by doing this activity? What did you think about it?
I think it's good to let us visualize, like put down what we think on the paper and then find out whether is there any relation between it or not, and you can come up with a new idea that you haven't thought of. And then it's good to see whether those make sense or not. This the connection that you try to make in your head. Sometimes when you put it down, it does not seem to be that way. Yeah, so it's good to brainstorm the idea and see the gap between that.
I think it might be helpful, to, at least for me, to see this as where my boundaries actually are in terms of what I'm looking at, right? I mean, you can't have a flower with 1,000 different, I mean, you can, right? But, you know, even now it was hard to actually narrow in, like, what are the things that I'm actually most interested in? And being really intentional about, okay, well, I'm drawing one petal, that means that that's going to be a significant focus in what I'm reading, right? But, you know, this could go on endlessly, you know, with all of the, so anyway, yeah.
I found that some of my, well, it's not a very good flower, but some of my petals were redundant.
Okay.
And then other ones just didn't belong with the other ones. So I thought I kind of can see some ways it should be whittled down.
I see you'd already done something like this before, right?
Yeah, but I had no idea that I was on any sort of right track. It was just trying to find those boundaries. But what I'm finding is that it's so much easier for me to conceptualize what I'm doing than to explain it. And I wonder if that's part of the struggle that I'm having. It makes perfect sense in here. And then it takes like 5 minutes to try to explain.
Okay, so there are, if you prefer to do it like on the computer and not on, or you want to save those concept maps and something, then you have software to do that. iMind Map, eMind, you can just check those out. Okay, another way is called this literature review matrix, and this is what I found again from literaturereview.hq.com, and he does this. It's somewhat like the template that I gave you earlier, except that instead of organizing it according to
This is Ben from Literature Review HQ. I'm here with a quick video to show you how to use a literature review matrix to basically plan and extract information from the literature from the papers that you read, but also to try and help you develop themes within your literature review, find what themes are. So I'm basically just going to go right through now how to start your literature review matrix and what it basically is. So you can see here I'm in PowerPoint, which is actually the software I found best for grading matrices. Matrices even. So I'm just going to clear that now. It's a new table. Now I've kind of got some idea what I'm going to put in here. Because I've read some articles and whatever, I kind of have an idea of some of the things I want to do. So you do need to start with something with ideas you don't know everything, really get down to this table, change that to a lot of people want to find more information. That's really important to do it. So over here, we're going to put the themes going down this column. I've already got a few themes here. I'm going to put it, so
these microbiology.
looking at microbiology here, and ecology and microorganisms. Okay, so these are some themes I have for my literature review. And to be honest, these might be good things, it might be bad things, it might be relevant to the literature, it might not. But the point is, doing it this way, we'll quickly find out whether they're good things or whether they're bad things or whether they need to be changed in some way. So I'm just going to check what font I have here. It's not to make it small enough so it can fit a good amount of these boxes. So the first bit that I read, so basically the themes go down the side and the articles, the individual areas go off here. So we've got one article per column. So put this article in here. Okay, so I've got my article, I've got my author, I've got my year. I'll basically go through these themes, basically write what the article contributes to each theme. The first column, actually this article doesn't contribute anything to the news, there's nothing involved. Look at carriage, and basically it's tells us something about carriage.
Did you get a hang of what he's trying to do here?
Okay, so it's all community functions. Do we get any information about non-interaction?
I don't know how to stop this, I'm just going to mute it. So what he's trying to do over here is, it's somewhat similar to the template that I gave you earlier. That organizes, that's the way to fit in what the article is all about, right? But here he's organizing stuff according to the theme or according to those petals that you rule, and grouping the literature within particular themes. So this is another way to organize the literature, and it's probably going to come more towards the later stage, as you've got as you find some scholars are more familiar and they're more closer to what your topic is all about, and so that's one way to group them. And before you actually start to write into those each body of literature, before you start writing them down, this is a useful way to bring those different scholars and connect it to particular themes or arguments together. Okay. Any questions on this?
DJ, I can't see. What's in the subsequent columns?
Oh, they're articles.
Those are there.
Those
Okay,
are
so
the
it's not
articles.
flipping your matrix.
Yeah, it's just flipping it. So the earlier ones were the articles and then the themes that come out of each article, and this one is according to the theme and the different articles that fit up.
I have a bunch of empirical based articles in my lit review, and I have a table of all my data, and I included the date of publication and the date of data collection. Can I just exclude the data collection? It's all over the map.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's, unless it's crucial for some, if you feel that it's crucial for some kind of argument, that if it's not, then I don't think you need to.
I mean, typically, if you're going to publish, you're not going to publish data that's 30 years old.
Or unless if you do want to sort of historicize it and say, oh, and at this particular time that was what it was like, but it's changed. So if you are doing some sort of time-based comparison, only then I think. Okay, so that kind of strategy of doing theme-based matrices is a useful way to group sources, because ultimately when you're writing the literature review down, your goal is to group them, and there are different ways in which you can group them. It's not like you can group the literature only one particular way, but that's where your interpretation comes into the picture, how you group the sources. You could do it, people have done it, either if you want to do it like chronologically, maybe comparing between, so for example, if your three bodies of literature are one in the colonial period in a particular country, second being in just during the post-independence, and the third being after this maybe a neoliberal period which is more recent. So you organize the literature based on how they have explored a particular phenomenon in these different time periods. Or you might use a geographical way of organizing it. So you have one, if you're doing a comparative study between two different regions, like if I were to do one being US, or community service learning in the US, and community service learning in India or Australia, and comparative rest of the other comparative kind of studies that do not include these two regions. So, I mean, there are different ways in which you can do. Disciplinary, maybe you're bringing one which is anthropological perspectives, another which is historical perspectives, and the third educational psychology perspectives. So, social group or identity. So I know one person who is doing it in terms of the relationship between race and national identity was one body of literature. Another one was the relationship between gender and national identity. And the third one was in the South Korean context, nationalism in South Korean context. So you can do it according to particular context or the thematic questions or specific relationships. There are different ways, and whichever you find the most compelling, way, or maybe a way of looking at the literature that other people haven't looked at before. That's a way to include resources. Yeah.
And the critical evaluation of contributions, do you mean evaluating sample size or validity?
I think it depends on, depends on the kind of literature that you're looking at. If you're having if your approach is quantitative and you're trying to find new variables, something like that, or maybe your contribution is a methodological one, then you might spend more time on that. But you may have to also about the findings, whether that finding is valid, and if you find that finding is not valid, and that's why you are mentioning the methods, because you're finding it problematic methodologically, then that's another reason why you would evaluate it based on methods. So that's something that you would have to look at, but you don't have to mention for every article that you write, unless it's something that is either insightful or problematic. Would you say that?
Yeah, I would say that more positivistic orientation to your study tends to be more of a critique of the methodological approaches of the studies you're reviewing. Whereas if you were, you might also do that with more qualitative or interpretive studies as well, but more from the sense of kind of what was missing kind of more conceptually in those studies. And that could be linked, that is always linked with your methodology. Mm-hmm. But, yeah. So I would say too, it's easier to see the kind of methodological problems or gaps. Mm-hmm. It's sometimes harder to see the conceptual problems or gaps in your literature. And so I would just push you to kind of make sure that you're also looking for those kind of conceptual problems or gaps of the literature you're reviewing, which helps you find then the larger gap that DT is referring to as saying, what's your contribution? Not just methodologically, but or in terms of maybe the sample you have or the site you have or something like that, which is important but relatively easy to identify. Like, oh, there's never been a study on this kind of sample in this kind of place. Mm-hmm. But that's not the conceptual contribution.
That's helpful.
Those are distinct, I think, and I think my experience is it's much easier for students to identify that methodological gap than it is the conceptual one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also about the context, because that's something that I was for a course that I was teaching last semester. So there was this tendency, right, to look at, I'm looking at this particular group, a refugee group, but that hasn't been looked at all. But that just adds a group to an existing, to so many others. But what is the contribution at a conceptual level beyond just adding the group? But the conversation has not really changed, it's just adding a particular group. So that's something that you have to think more about as well. So for example, in my research, I'm looking at India, and then you say, oh, that community service learning my argument is that it's looked at in the social sciences, but not so much in the medical field, and it's been looked at a lot in the US or in the global north, but not so much in India. So, but what am I contributing just by adding India and public health? I'm looking at comparing, bringing in post-colonial, how has public health developed in a post-colonial country, and how has that shaped it? And I think that brings in at a conceptual level, a particular way of looking at the literature that could be applied to other contexts. Yeah, and this is finally the template that I gave you, right? Behind that, there's a rubric. So this rubric is a way for you to evaluate yourselves when you're doing the literature review, when you're writing it down. So when you write it down, are you including criteria for why what is the literature that you've included, what is the literature that you've excluded, because that's important for telling the reader the scope of your literature review. It's not exhaustive, It's not exhaustive, it's not looking at everything on a particular topic, but you're doing that boundary, drawing those boundaries about what you're including and what you're excluding. And you have to tell the reader that. Then saying what has been done and and situating what has been done within historical context, disciplinary context, socio-cultural context. So these are some ways to, this rubric is a way for you to evaluate your own writing. Sort of phrase the rubric the same. Okay. Yeah. So that's clear criteria for inclusion and exclusion. You have to say what is the what you have to provide strong and explicit reasons for the way you've organized it. Why have you organized it the way you have? And throughout give signposts that this is, saying that this is that section of the literature and providing transitions from one body to the other. And for every body of literature, you need to make the connections between each of the bodies of literature as well as to your problem. Okay? And so they have to be in conversation with each other or in dialogue with each other, because like I said at the beginning, doing a literature review is like entering a conversation, and so you have to make sure that that those bodies of literature are in dialogue with each other. And then through a critical evaluation, you're not just describing the literature that you're read, but you're also evaluating it and finding that gap, or however you want to phrase it, because it's from that gap that that's the way that you can highlight the significance of your study, saying that this is where my study comes in, which hasn't been done before or hasn't been said before. So by doing that literature review, you can you have to frame it in a way that highlights the significance of your study. And yeah, so this is another, again from literature review, and you can see I'm a big fan of this website, but it's got some very good YouTube resources. So this is one way, you can see the Venn diagram, that's one way of organizing. And he's also got a jigsaw puzzle. So it's there on the blog, so if you want to look at this YouTube video or other on that particular website, then you can check them out. Okay. Any questions? Do you feel it's demystifying? A little?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would encourage you to actually take that rubric out. I've used this rubric for many, many years now with both master's and PhD students. And I would just say, when you're writing, take this rubric out and ask yourself, have I done that? How can I do that, right? Especially, I think so the coverage piece can be done more at the very beginning, right? You set it out, you signpost as a DQ saying what you're going to cover and how and why, right? But you have to, at some point, make that decision based on this kind of conceptual map you're doing. And the significance is also, at one spot within the literature review, you tell your reader what the significance is, the contribution is. Of course, you build that up throughout the whole piece, but you really tell the reader at one point. I think the synthesis ones, and then you can see they have the most criteria, or it has the most criteria, are the ones for you to think about the most. Because that's the question about how do I bring together these different pieces, both empirical or theoretical pieces that I'm reading, and try to synthesize it in a way that reveals my contribution, or reveals the key concepts that I'm going to talk about, And places your own study within this context of this broader conversation, historically, as she said, and socially and geographically. So I think that the hardest one again on this one for people to most attend to is the synthesis piece. Although all of them should be used, but take it out and use it. Tape it to your computer, like, you know, that little edge here, right here, or something. I'm serious, sometimes having those little reminders, because we remember this now, and then you kind of put it away, and you kind of forget to do it, and then your you know, a colleague or your advisor reads it, and then they're like making all these comments about it, and they're like, oh yeah, bring that back out, and then you start to make sense of the comments we're gonna give.
I'm gonna tattoo it on my arm.
There you go. Whatever style you prefer, as long as you think about it.
Can we get the slides?
Yes, it's on, in the email there is this blog site link. You can go over there and it's
OLPD spring
spring
workshop.
workshop, very long one. And so this is, so it's over here, and if you haven't been to the website before, I'll be putting up, so for the writing workshop that was there last week, 2 weeks ago, the video recording of that is here, and the Prezi for that one is here. And if you're MA students and you missed the one earlier in the month, then I don't have video podcast, but I have an audio podcast for that. So,
Is there a recommended maximum length for the review for the doctoral? For OLPD? And then also
For MA or PhD?
PhD.
Just 500 pages.
20?
For literature reviews or maximum length?
Yeah.
Or recommended length? You know, in part it depends on the bodies of literature, right? And how extensively that topic has been researched, and therefore how much you might need to cover in that. But I think one could say, okay, somewhere between 25 and 35.
I'm at 80.
Yeah, well, if you're at that many pages.
I know I have some cutting to do.
Yes. I read a literature review like that recently, and my key comments were, there's a lot of good stuff there, cut.
Okay.
So when you
Because what the issue often is synthesis. That you add, you review. But ultimately, across those 50 or whatever, 70 studies, what are the most critical? How do you bring them together so that you don't have to necessarily review every single study, but you're actually making